Cool. So thanks for showing up, everyone. This is continuous integration for custom nerve systems. And I'll also give you the disclaimer on this one. I'm definitely not the expert at this. Looks like we do have two of the experts in the room today, so I'll defer to any of the Nerves core team to keep me honest on anything I might be wrong on. But that being said, I decided to put this together based on having to maintain a little bit of this system and then kind of having that like open up a little world into this that I hadn't seen before that I think can be pretty valuable, especially if you don't know about it or you're trying to put together your own CI pipeline and stuff like that, or if you're just forking an existing nerve system. I noticed some things that could be really helpful with that and kind of some knowledge that's good to know about that might not be completely obvious if you're just jumping into this stuff, especially for the first time too. So my name is Alex. You can catch me at A.McLean on Elixir, Slack, GitHub, basically those usual places. I'll also say here too, for the presentation, I am totally interruptible. So if you've got a question that might be relevant to a certain part of the presentation, feel free to drop it there. The end of a slide or beginning of the next one could be a usual good place to drop that. I do also have a dedicated question section at the end. So if you're the type of person who'd rather just hold your question to the end, you'll have time there too. So whatever suits you works for me. So we'll just level set on the basics here first because realize everyone here is kind of coming from different levels of experience. So let's kind of start by getting everybody on the same page. So the first part of this is what I see essentially as different layers of nerves, and at a very high level. I'd call that the application layer and the system layer. So if you're starting up a nerves project, if you're in the Elixir side, you're doing the mixed nerves new stuff. That's spinning up essentially a new nerves application, OTP application essentially. And you can kind of think of that as the Elixir part. So if you're seeing Elixir, you're probably in that application layer. The system layer, I kind of call the Linux bits. So it's like everything else and all the stuff you need to stand up the system. And you'll need probably continuous integration for both of those parts, but this talk specifically focuses on the system part, and CI for the application level could probably be its own talk. Probably should be its own talk at some point. But in this one, we're basically focusing on the system layer. So some of the things that you'd find in that nerve system, number one, the Beam VM, for example. So that's got like the version of Erlang that's compiled into your system. It's got Buildroot in that layer. And so that's essentially the tooling that's used to package an embedded Linux system specifically for your board, for your target hardware. And just a little brief primer on that. You might be used to something running on your desktop, like Ubuntu, Debian, Manjaro, some Linux distro like that. Those also, as you probably know, may come with some extra cruft you're not using or not needing. So it's probably got extra drivers in there. So when you're hot swapping like a USB drive in and out of your computer, it's not requiring you to download the drivers to do that. It's already got them. That can be a problem in an embedded system. Sometimes you want to just slim that down to kind of the bare essentials that your system needs to run, and to keep that image size small, and just also for the potential security issues around that of just making it really targeted to only needing to do what that system actually needs to do. And that's one of those things that Buildroot really helps with there. Some of the other stuff you'll find in the system at this level is the other stuff you'd probably typically expect. So like drivers, the device tree stuff, if you need to do kernel patches. So basically those kind of things. There's essentially two types of nerve systems if you boil it down. There's the official images, and those are the ones maintained by the Nerves core team. So you'll see like the Raspberry Pi images for like the 3, the 0 wireless, BeagleBone Black, stuff like that. Then there's another set of systems, which are essentially custom systems. And at the end of the day, those are nerve systems that are maintained by you. And there's two pathways to get there. There's kind of the top-down or the bottom-up approach. From the top down, that kind of looks like forking one of those official nerve systems and then making your changes to it. And basically taking over your own maintenance of it from there. The bottom-up approach is if there's a piece of hardware like a chip that's not supported by nerves yet, you can bring that up from the bottom up of getting the driver support, the builder support, all that stuff, and building your system up from there to support nerves, essentially from ground zero. This presentation is mainly going to focus on the custom system, or the top-down approach of just forking a nerve system, but you could essentially use this with either way. So one of the easiest ways to start here with a custom nerve system is, like I said, to fork it from one of the official systems. So if you've got a project that's running on Raspberry Pi or BeagleBone or something like that, and you need to make some changes, say you need to add some drivers for a sensor, or you want to switch the way some of the pins work or something like that, the easiest way to get started with that is probably to fork that image, the official image, and then make your modifications to it. One of the things I've personally found when doing this is it's really tempting to want to hit that GitHub fork button. I personally like to stay away from this one because GitHub only lets you fork that repository to, you can only fork it to another organization once because it uses the same name. So it's okay to fork the same thing to multiple organizations, but say you're doing a hobby project or a commercial project, for example. The consulting world's a good example of this. If you only fork that system, or if you fork the system, we'll say the BeagleBone system, if you use the GitHub fork to do that, you're only going to be able to have one copy of it. So if you're working on, say, one client project, that's your modified system. But as soon as another client comes along that needs their own modified version of that BeagleBone system, now you're kind of stuck not being able to hit the fork button again. So I personally avoid that route. I just do a git clone from the official system. I create a repo named after whatever I want the new system to be called. So personal projects, I just do like a project name, like nerve system underscore, whatever the project is called. Client projects, I just throw the client name in there. And then push that system just with a git push back up to your own repo. One of the things that might be a gotcha in there is then, well, if there's upstream changes happening to that official system, how do you want to pull them back down into your system if you want to keep up with maintenance or stuff like that? And at least the way I do it is I set an upstream remote to the official system, and then just my normal origin remote is the repo that I'm using on a regular basis. So that's a strategy I found here that seems to work pretty well. Feel free to adopt this if you like the idea. Feel free not to if you don't like the idea. So now that we've covered that, let's jump into a little of the CI here. So when you're cloning one of the official nerve systems, there's a couple things that you get bundled along with that system. So kind of starting from the top, you'll get a Circle CI pipeline. So all the official systems are using Circle CI as a CI tool, so you kind of inherit a lot of that. Also get to that in a minute too in another slide. You get this build tools orb, and we'll dive into what that's doing. Automated releases, the option to use a package download site, and there's an entire section on this because that's a new thing. And you also get integration tests along with this. But I'll also give the warning, there's a little bit of stuff going on with the integration tests right now, and there's some stuff in the works. So I'll touch on it slightly, but there's going to be some news here in the future on that one, long story short. So Circle CI, some of you from the website probably know about this already. Others may not know about this. Long story short, it's a cloud-based continuous integration tool, and it can also help you with automating your tasks. So it's basically the equivalent of other tools like Travis or Jenkins or GitHub Actions, if any of you are using those. So basically a way to push your tasks up to the cloud and be able to have the cloud run automated jobs on your system. Circle CI, they do have paid plans, but they do also have a free tier to be able to not just try out the service, but you basically get a bucket of minutes per month in the free tier. So it's like free for life, but it's got some restrictions around it. some of those restrictions being the build minutes that I just mentioned. So they give you, I think it's like 6,000 or something. But anyway, we'll check out their site because I'm sure that's going to vary depending on when you watch the talk. But that's one of the limitations. Also concurrent jobs, so they'll limit the number of jobs that can run at a time. So here you can kind of see on the side, there's like 6 tasks in this potential flow here. And if you're on that free tier, let's say like maybe only 2 are going to be able to run at a time, whereas if you're on the paid tier, it might run like all 6 at once. And then also number of seats is a restriction. So if you're on a larger team, you might exceed the number of people who can actually get into the CI system to use it. If you're on a smaller team or you're doing a hobby project, that probably doesn't matter, and the free tier is probably going to be just fine for you. Cool thing about the free tier is since it exists, it's a great place to just start playing around with how Nerve CI works in general. So there's it's pretty low risk just to be able to jump in and get started with it. So next up, you've got the CI pipeline. This is one of the mechanisms of how Circle CI works, and this comes along with the project. So inside of the Nerve system, you've got a Circle CI directory here, and this whole system is just, the CI system is just configured off of a YAML-based configuration. So it's got some ceremony here to set things up, and then it's got workflows that you can define to do different tasks for you in that system. So all the configuration happens in YAML. They have a dashboard that you can use to view this. It is just a viewer. You can't do editing from the dashboard, or at least like from like drag and drop or anything. It's all text-based config. But it will show you like the steps of your pipeline and kind of the sequences that your workflow is going through and those kind of things. So that's cool as a visual to just be able to have to log into and see that. Then we've got the build tools orb, and this is really what drug me into this this bit of the project in this talk, was having to do a little maintenance on this library. And this is pretty cool. So first of all, an orb is essentially just a name for a Circle CI library. So really simple. Circle CI just uses orb because it's their cute little name for it. But basically just think about it as a library. The cool thing about this one is the build tools. So build tools is provided by the Nerves project, and this is going to give you those common CI tasks for your Nerve system. And we'll get into what all those tasks are here in a minute. You also get some documentation and examples along with this, so you can go through the README and some of that stuff here and get a better idea on how to use the system. And one of the other really cool things about this that I like is this is actually available as open source on GitHub. So I'm showing the GitHub repo right here. And so it's not something that's just like closed off or proprietary or specific to what the core team is doing. So this is actually a package that you can actually use in your own projects. And that's something that didn't initially click in my mind until I kind of got in and started using it. And then let's touch on Buildroot dependencies real quick as well too, because this will come up here in a slide or two. So the way that Buildroot works to pull things down and build your system is it's pulling down essentially packages from the web to create your Nerve system. When this happens locally, so this can happen locally on your machine if you're building a system manually. It can also happen in the cloud if CI is building your system. And when this happens, Buildroot is putting these configured by Nerves, is putting them in a local cache here at nerve/dl. The catch with this, this works locally because locally your disk is persisted unless for some reason you're pulling your hard drive out on a regular basis. But with CI, you've got, that's running in essentially Docker containers, and those containers are getting shut down after your CI builds are completing. So in CI, you don't have access to this package cache that Buildroot would normally have if you were using it locally. So that's a little bit of a catch that there's a workaround to, but just kind of be aware that that's one of the Buildroot mechanics. So knowing that, let's jump into some of the CI steps here. And just to give you an overview of that build tools package, we've got like 4 major things that package is going to give you, 4 major jobs. The first one, being able to get the Buildroot dependencies. Next, being able to build the system, run your tests, and deploy your system. Although when I read this, I think deployed in the field, and I think maybe a better way to describe this is release your system. So be able to release a versioned package that can be loaded onto a system. So first up, the Buildroot dependencies job here. This is a screenshot of one of the CI workflows. And when you see this, there's going to be a lot of boilerplate that's just repeated in a lot of these. So I've kind of highlighted down here really some of the core tasks of the meat and potatoes that really happens in each one of these steps. So these are basically the places to focus. So with getting the Buildroot dependencies, to start off with, that's going to restore the nerves downloads. So that's what I just mentioned earlier for where Buildroot puts its package cache. And this one is done on the Circle CI side. So Circle CI has a cache that you're able to use. It expires, I believe it's every 15 days right now. And they've got that information online too if they ever change that. And it's a way that your CI jobs can reuse that data between jobs. So like I said before, it's on a local machine, you've got your local disk to be able to do that. On CI, that kind of like mounts a local disk in a sense, kind of air quotes there, between your CI containers, so you can reuse that data. Next, it's going to get those Buildroot dependencies. So if the cache is cold, it's going to have to go out and get all of the dependencies. If the cache is warm, then it's going to have restored as much as it can from that nerves cache. And if there's any packages you might have changed, it'll go out and just pull those new packages for you. Next up is going to save those nerves downloads. So that's putting it back in that Circle CI cache for it to be able to use in next jobs in this workflow or next jobs on your next runs for your next version or your next branch or so on. And then another optional site here is to be able to push these packages to a package download site. And we'll get into that later in the presentation as well. So next up is building the system. And this is probably one of the simplest ones to grasp conceptually, but also like the longest one that runs. So there's a lot kind of going on under the hood here, but conceptually, this one's simple. The build task is essentially the one that's running make for Buildroot. So it's just doing all of the compiling here. And then it does a sanity check of whether it really built the system or not. I definitely want to point out the did I really build task here, because this one usually has a tendency to bite me personally, at least. And the catch is before you push up to CI, make sure you bump the version file in that nerves repo. So in that nerve system repo, because there's one called version at the top level. If you don't do that, the system won't actually build and it'll get stuck here in CI. And like I said, it always gets me. So I just wanted to shout out to watch out for that. Then there's the test tasks and or the job that runs your integration tests essentially. And fair warning on this one, this is something that's getting reworked, long story short. So I did have a little trouble. I had a lot of trouble, honestly, trying to get this stuff working. And I think the short answer right now, and any of the core maintainers on the call can keep me honest if I get this off. But I think this is a bit of a broken thing right now that's got plans to get fixed in the future here. And so.
Do you mind if I chime in just for
Yes, absolutely, Connor. You're the perfect person to chime in here.
I don't think anyone's working on this, unless Justin is. We don't like. I don't think John, Frank, or I use it. I guess
I'm working on it, but we're working on it in our own fun way.
Okay.
So all of that WireGuard work is with this in mind, so that you can create a center network of hardware devices that you can then run tests through and get to on its own private VPN easily.
So never mind. It turns out John's working on it. I just can't keep track of all John's projects.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's really slow though. It's like this is yeah, this isn't a major thing that's,
No one's bankrolling it then.
yeah.
Sounds like help wanted, long story short, if anyone wants to help fix the test system.
Yeah, well, and part of the idea here is there's a lot of systems, and that just takes a lot of time to do really menial things, and especially around testing. So this has been born from like, okay, we're going to release systems. We want to accurately know that they're working good enough. You know, the sanity, did it turn on? And so we've been trying to create, or I guess me, because I want to know, like a centralized device farm that we can easily just push these new firmwares to after we build a new system to make sure it just even comes up and does a few sanity checks. And naturally, since we're doing it, it's going to be open source and other people can try to use it as well.
Awesome. So yeah, I think you said something better longer that I think I'll say shorter. I'm just gonna butcher everything you said here then. Long story short, for this one then is there's stuff in the works around this, but if you were to happen to fork one of these official nerve systems right now, you're probably going to run into some trouble when you start running these tests in CI if you go to run that, because essentially like this nerves test client is not wired up to anything anymore right now, and so this stuff is basically getting refactored. So if you fork this, it's probably going to break, but right now that's okay. There's plans in the works, but there's some kind of workarounds to be able to at least get around this for now until we kind of get those next steps there. And at least the two gotchas I found when going through this were nerves test client. So like I had to comment this out. And the other thing being Nerves Hub. So I think it's public knowledge right now that Nerves Hub is sunset at the end of next month, I think it is. So you might either have to pull this out of your system or switch it over to, if you've got like a private self-hosted instance or something like that, like switch it over to where it's actually going. And if you don't happen to have that stuff, the kind of fail-safe way is as horrible as this is from kind of like a maintainer's perspective, from a maintenance perspective, you can comment out the entire build test task and it works. The pipeline goes back to working. It's not a graceful solution, but hopefully, like when you said, once the WireGuard stuff and stuff kind of lands, hopefully there's a better system for the integration tests at that point. I don't know, John, do you have anything you want to add there, or does this seem accurate to you?
No, that's great and accurate.
Okay, cool. Wanted to make sure I wasn't misrepresenting, and awesome to have you on the call for this. So yeah, next up then is the deploy system job. And there's a couple cool things about this one that it does for you. So one is being able to create your release notes. So there's a change log that comes along with that official nerve system that you can modify along with it. And anything you drop in that change log, just with the version number as the header and then description underneath that. This task is going to go through and parse that change log and build it into a GitHub release description and that kind of information for you. So that's a really cool thing that comes along with this CI job. And then the other bit is being able to deploy your nerves artifacts to GitHub. So that's essentially your system image in a sense. And so it'll build and upload that file right to that GitHub release for you as well. All this is triggered by just making a tag in Git and then just pushing that tag up to GitHub, and obviously the change sets and stuff to go with it. But you just fire that off, Circle CI picks up on that, and it'll run this deploy system task and drop a draft release like this into your system in GitHub for you. And this one I just happen to label like version 2.0.1, so it picks up on that there. It'll start off with a draft title, so you can go in and edit this title and name it whatever you want to. That description from the changelog gets dropped right here. Mine was just test to get this out quickly, but ideally you'd probably have some bullet points in here of what changed. And this is that nerve system artifact. So essentially your bundled up compiled version of that system right here. And this is the thing that that deps-git is essentially able to pull back down from GitHub when you point it to the repo. So it's essentially looking for this and it's able to pull that down for your nerve system. So there's also some environment variables that you're probably going to have to set up in CI for this, and there's a couple ways to do that. Circle CI has two different ways in general that you can set up environment variables. One is in the sense of a context, which you can think of as like reusable environment variables between projects. And Circle CI has a default context called org global, and that's basically baked into the official nerve systems here. So if you want to change that to a different name, if you call yours like nerves projects or nerve systems or something, you can make that change here. If you don't want to use this at all and you want to do it on a project by project basis, you can get rid of these lines. And there's environment variables in your project settings in Circle CI, and you can set those up there as well. So kind of whatever works for you. And if you're maintaining multiple systems or a lot of systems, you might want to set up or go with the org global context to do that. I should also touch on resource class briefly here too. So this is essentially the way to set your compute resources that you're using for that container that's starting up. And this really matters mostly for the build system task because this is the one that takes the longest to run. That's that Buildroot compilation that's multi-threaded and can take a long time. So long story short, probably no surprise, large means faster, medium means cheaper. If you're on the free tier, this still applies to you, but in a way you might not be thinking about. So these essentially relate to build minutes, build time, depending on whether you're using large or medium, because they have different multipliers that go along with them. So just be aware if you're using large on the free tier, it might chew through your time faster. That being said, at least I personally haven't had issues on the free tier with it right now. But also most of my critical nerve systems are compiled through the work organization with a paid CI account, and my hobby projects don't get compiled nearly as much. So if you're testing this, or if you're doing this for like a real client project or a real product that's in production, this might run you out of minutes. So just be aware of that, and you might just need to go through some more minutes at CI. So on to the package download site then, because this is one of the new things that's kind of come along here in the last month-ish or something like that. So first of all, what is it? And I touched on this a little earlier in the presentation. So Buildroot maintains that cache of packages. Out of the box, Buildroot does that locally, but the package download site is essentially a way to be able to get those packages into the cloud. So a way to do cloud hosting for those packages, so you can pull them down from essentially anywhere that you need them. Buildroot does host a mirror for those packages essentially, so you can go out and like get those from like the official sources. This is a way to have a backup for that, and I'll get into that. And these are configured in Buildroot with primary site and backup site. And you can get to these either in the nerves def config. You might have to add one or two of these or both of these, but you can get to it either in the def config if you just like the text way to configure it this. Or you can run menu config and you can search for this in menu config, and that's the graphical way to do this. So why does this exist for nerves? Number one, GitHub made an API change. I forget exactly what it was, but I feel like it was in the last 3 months at this point, that ended up breaking those package URLs for the Buildroot packages. And long story short, that caused a lot of havoc until that was fixed. So one of those consequences was it was basically impossible for nerves users to be able to build those systems. And if I remember correctly too, I think this also caused the core team grief with the official systems not being able to be built, which is a bit of a problem there. So those official images have now been switched over to be hosted on a package download site. So that's serving the packages for the official systems. The cool thing about the package download site and this stuff being open source is that means you can now host your own package download site as well. So especially if you're running like your own mission critical project, if you're running a commercial project and you want to make sure you're avoiding or mitigating that risk of what happens when GitHub breaks or you can't get to one of those package URLs or something like that. This is a way you can put that resiliency in your system and be able to run this. So long story short, this is essentially all you have to do is host this on a website somewhere. And one of the easiest ways to do this is to set it up through AWS S3 and just host it right off an S3 bucket. So I'm going to go through some of the steps to do that and what this configuration looks like. There is also documentation for this in the GitHub repo, and I've got a link to that in here and a slide on it too. So just keep that in mind. So to host your own site off an S3 bucket, first of all, hop into your AWS S3 account. Go to create bucket and pick a bucket name. The catch to the bucket names are they're globally unique across AWS for every single user. So they're like, you can't use a bucket name that somebody else has picked. So you either need to make it something random or really descriptive to what you're doing. So in this case, if this is going to get hosted on, say, my domain, I might just put in what my domain here is that's going to get hosted on. Since I own that domain, probably nobody else is going to pick this as a bucket name. The other way to do it is like pick a name and then put some kind of like random number or hash at the end of it, and that'll usually get you a unique bucket too. And pick where it's going to get hosted, which region it's going to get hosted in. The next kind of got you in that process just to watch out for is, since we want this to be public, make sure to turn off block public access. So this is on by default for security on AWS. Just make sure you tick that box off and then hit the little yes, I acknowledge that this is public and all that, and things should be fine there. And go ahead and create your bucket. If you end up noticing that some of the things in your bucket, like you can't get to them when you go put them in your browser and try to download them, sometimes that public switch doesn't work right. I don't know why, but I've experienced it a couple times. If you happen to run into that, there's a really easy fix for it. Just go in and do the little select all checkbox for anything that might happen to be in your bucket. Go up to the actions menu and just hit make public using ACL. And at least in my experience, every time I've had that little problem, I just do this and everything's fine again. So that's the little fix for that. Once you've made your bucket, AWS will give you a URL for it. So it'll typically look something like this. You can find it by clicking something in your bucket and hitting copy URL. And then your URL for the bucket is just everything without that file name on the end here. So if you wanted to, if you don't have your own domain name yet, or you just want to host it like straight off the bucket, you can use this URL. It should work just fine. If you do have your own domain name, you can go into your DNS provider and set up a CNAME record for this. And that'll link your bucket to essentially whatever host name you choose. And then you can reorganize this URL a little bit to be able to link it to that, to your own host name there. So the s3.amazonaws.com part goes at the end, and you just take your bucket name out of here and throw it at the beginning of that. And it should set up that CNAME record just fine. And then you can use your own domain name to get to that bucket. Next part here is adding a CI user. So at that point, your bucket is set up and you should be able to access it, like download from it from Buildroot and stuff like that. The next bit then is configuring AWS for Circle CI, so that Circle CI can go push stuff into that bucket. So you'll need to go into IAM, the identity manager, and add another user. And here I've just picked a name, Circle CI. So it's typically good practice to like set up a new user for each one of the automated like services that you need. So each service kind of gets its own account. So we're using Circle CI, picked that here, and give it an access key to be able to get to that service. And don't put don't generate a password for it, because essentially this means this account is designed for a human to be able to get into. So we don't want someone to log in with a password on this. We just want a programmatic service to be able to get to it with a access key and a secret. Next, it's going to ask you to assign this user to a group. This is good because it's typically better to do group-based permissions than user-based permissions. It'll be easier to manage your permissions if you do things that way typically. So if you don't have a group set up yet, say add user to group, create a new group, and we'll just make one here called nerve CI. So anything that deals with CI will just add to this group. At that point, you're going to get the access key and the secret key for your user. This is the only place you'll be able to get to the secret key. So click show on this, jot all this down, save it in, ideally a password manager, and we're going to need this information for later. Next, you're going to need to create a policy to be able to get to that to the S3 bucket from that user. So basically giving that CI user permissions. There's two things here in AWS for that. Number one, the actions that user is allowed to do. In this case, we're giving that user the ability to do anything they want in S3. Feel free to be more restrictive with this if you want to, but this, in general, this is the shortest way to get it set up. And then for resource down here, we're saying that user has access to the My Download Site bucket here. So just restricting them only to be able to do that on AWS. And again, if you want to make any of this more restrictive, by all means do it. This is just the simplest way to start. That's the most reasonably secure. Then we're going to need to name that policy. So we'll just call that the nerve CI policy. And then it shows us what the policy is doing down here. And then we're going to need to go into the group, go over to permissions, and attach that policy. And then just pick the nerve CI policy, and it's attached. So next step is we've pretty much got everything done in AWS at this point. So the next steps are to go back to the Circle CI config in that project. And there's a couple things that we can do now to that get-br-dependencies task. So now that we have a package download site for our system, we can turn off Circle CI's cache because we don't really need it cached in both places. So there's a save DL cache property down here. You can set that to false, and then that essentially saves the time of Circle CI not having to save it to its own cache, which last I checked, I think it's about like 4-ish minutes to do that, or at least on the nerve system I tested. Then just go in here and add the download site URL, and that's what you were able to either paste out of the S3 dashboard there, or if you've got your own domain name, this is the place to put that URL in here. Then there's a little bit of environment variable setup to do in Circle CI. So like I said earlier, you could either do this in a context or in the project, depending on kind of your taste and what you want to do. These are essentially the keys you're going to need to plug in, and these are also documented in the repo for this. So I won't go over all these, but it's essentially the information from the AWS stuff we just set up. And then this isn't part of the CI side of things. So like CI handles this part in Buildroot for you for your CI builds. But if you also want to happen to use your package download site locally, you can do that as well. Hop into Buildroot either through the, basically look for the primary site property, either dump that into the nerves def config or hop into the menu config. Just find that property, it'll pull up primary download site, put your URL in here, and then anytime you're building your nerve system locally, it'll pull from your package download site first. And then down here, like Buildroot is the backup download site. So if yours fails or doesn't have your packages cached up there, it'll revert to this as a backup. Documentation. So this is sitting in the Build Tools repo in Nerves project. There's some information in here. There might be some that's still missing. So I'll say, go through and try this stuff out if it's interesting. And anything that you might see missing, definitely contribute back up. But yeah, this is basically the stuff that I learned. This is kind of what I've found out so far from integrating this into a system and kind of playing around with it. And any questions? No questions? Crystal clear?
I've got one for you.
Yeah.
What about scenarios where you don't want your custom systems to be public?
That's a great question. There's technically nothing stopping you from hosting this on a private server if you wanted to. The other thing I'm sure you could set up is you could put some auth in front of that URL if you wanted to. Maybe I shouldn't speak too soon on that. I'm not sure how Buildroot would handle that. But basically, if you set up an internal server, there's nothing really stopping you from setting that kind of thing up.
I think Buildroot actually has a thing for that specifically. I can't remember how to use it, but I'm pretty sure there's like some magic environment variable that you can set as an auth header, and it goes to every HTTP request it makes.
Okay, cool.
I'm not like 100% sure about that, but I'm fairly certain it is.
Is it possible to set the primary site to like an IP address? Because if so, you could just have it on the other
Yeah,
side.
so what that does actually, so every package is received by curl or wget, I think like one of the two. And all that site is just replacing the very first, like the host, basically. Everything else is the same.
Okay, so if that's the case, you could just have it on inside your VPN at that point.
Right, you could actually have it as a file on your file system. Since it goes to curl, you could actually do file : / and it would resolve it just the same.
Well, there you go. So yes, you can have it completely private if you wanted to.
Is anybody using CI right now? And have any of you played around with the build tools orb? No? John obviously has.
Actually, if I'm being honest, if it's only me working on a project, I don't even bother. I find that I am mucking around with stuff frequently enough that I just have it as part of one of the build steps to just have the system built on my local machine, basically until I need to like either deploy it or have someone else build it.
Yeah, that's there's another good point that reminded me of that I forgot to mention too. So to testing, even though the integration test might be broken right now, another way you can still test is if you're testing up in your application layer, you can essentially recompile your nerve system, pull it into the application, and make sure your application works as it's supposed to. And if it's doing that when it's deployed on hardware, then I mean, it's kind of manual testing or relying on your automated test up at the app layer. So it's not quite ideal, but it can get you by for now. And I'll say I'm guilty of having done that. So. Is anybody else doing CI a different way?
Yeah, I'm doing CI with GitHub Actions. I can't say it's very clean. I've looked at the Circle CI stuff before, and it's been very iterative, but it does work. It's just GitHub Actions is nice, except when you run it in a Docker container, it tends to have very weird paths, so you have to keep iterating on.
Mm-hmm.
We've actually been experimenting with GitHub Actions. So I'd be interested to see what you've done and compare it to what we have.
Yeah, I can paste in our repo. It's a mess. I'll admit that, but it is currently building the system. So, in theory, it's going to work tonight.
This is interesting to hear because I had been I'd been doing some maintenance to bring back up a nerve system for just a hobby project, kind of up to date. And I was redoing the CI over to GitHub Actions until I saw the build tools. Then I was like, wait a second, I should just go back to Circle CI. So I'm wondering,
No,
if
yeah, I mean, I don't think you should take it as we're switching to GitHub Actions, but it's just, I have some beef with GitHub Actions, mainly that you can't control the size of your runners unless
Yeah.
you're making your own custom runner. So we had a really nice performance increase by changing to these medium or even large instances, which, I mean, like, what is it? Maybe 10 minutes, I don't know, 20 minutes at the max that you're saving. But it's like, it just irks me to lose time.
Yeah,
So,
totally.
but you know, GitHub Actions definitely is moving fast. So having a general idea, I think, has been more or less helpful. There's also been some, you know, hope for it internally and among some of our teams. So might as well just take a look. Is the view that we're at right now.
Mhm.
There is another, like, outside of, like, I know this was sort of like focused on CI, but if you flip it into like your end goal being having a package cache of everything, you can actually just like upload all of it. Well, not the primary download site that you showed at the end there, but like the full system itself, you can like just compile on your computer and upload to a GitHub release, and that will make all of the mix tooling and stuff work as well. So like I find that, especially for like just my hobby projects, like if I'm gonna already have built it on my local machine, putting it on CI is just gonna take the same amount of time to build it again, or I could just like upload my already built artifacts to it and be done with it. So I think that's another method forward, as well as just uploading your already built one on your machine to the GitHub release.
That's such a great point. Yeah. So yeah, if you're dabbling in it, or if you're doing it from the hobbyist level or stuff like that, and you're already building locally, yeah, just push right up to GitHub.
Something we're looking into is whether or not we can use pre-commit hooks to use our developers' laptops as like an informal CI, which is like the automated version of what Connor just suggested. I have no idea whether it's possible. That's why we're looking into it, but it's intriguing.
That's an interesting concept.
Yeah, I'm sure it is possible with enough work, but I guess at that point, are you really saving anything? I don't know. I'd be interested to see the result of it.
Yeah, Roland, you'll have to let us know how that experiment goes. That's an interesting one. Anyone else got questions, thoughts? Completely baffled and don't know how this applies to you? Cool. Well then, thanks for showing up to this part, and I guess I'll stop the recording here and we can get on to social time then.